The blood-red sun cast long shadows across the rolling plains of Wyoming Territory as Darcy Dawson stared into the rushing waters of the Sweetwater River, her tears mingling with the current that had already taken so much from her. It had been 3 months since the fever claimed Thomas, leaving her alone with their small homestead and the crushing weight of a future she never planned to face alone. Darcy pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the autumn wind picked up, rustling the tall grasses along the riverbank. At 23, widowhood felt like a cruel joke, a theft of the life she and Thomas had barely begun to build after traveling west from Pennsylvania in '68. That was 2 years ago. Now it was 1870, and the Wyoming Territory stretched before her, beautiful and merciless. Every evening since Thomas's passing, she'd walked the half-mile from her cabin to this bend in the river. Sometimes she prayed. Sometimes she cried. Most times she simply stood in silence, watching the water flow endlessly onward while she remained trapped in a moment that refused to release her. "Madam, are you all right?" The voice startled her from behind, deep and cautious. Darcy spun around, one hand instinctively reaching for the small knife she'd taken to carrying in her pocket. A tall man stood several yards away, keeping a respectful distance. His clothes were trail-worn but clean denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a dust-covered vest. The cowboy hat in his hands revealed sun-lightened brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. "I didn't mean to frighten you," he said. "Just seemed unusual to see someone standing out here alone this close to sundown." Darcy relaxed her grip on the knife but didn't remove her hand from her pocket. "I'm fine, thank you, just thinking," the stranger nodded, a hint of understanding in his eyes. "River's good for that." He glanced at the rushing water. "Mine's always clearer near moving water." "Are you crossing?" Darcy asked, noting he had no horse with him, which was unusual for these parts. "Already did." He gestured vaguely upstream. "Left my mount on the other side to check something I spotted. Thought I saw smoke from your direction. Wanted to make sure no one's homestead was burning." "That would be my chimney," Darcy replied, finding her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "Just getting supper started before my evening walk." The man nodded again, seeming ready to leave, then hesitated. "Name's Adam Zachary, madam. I've been driving cattle north from Texas, taking a small herd to sell in Montana Territory." "Darcy Dawson," she replied, surprised at herself for offering her name to a stranger. But something in his direct gaze put her at ease, the openness perhaps, or the lack of pity that so often appeared in people's eyes when they learned of her situation. "Pleasure, Mrs. Dawson. I should be getting back to my herd. My men will be wondering where I wandered off to." He settled his hat back on his head. "Evening walks are fine, but maybe not so close to dark. Not everyone passing through these parts has good intentions." "I can take care of myself, Mr. Zachary," Darcy said, more sharply than she intended. A smile flickered across his face. "Never doubted it for a second, madam. Still, be safe." With a slight tip of his hat, he turned and began walking upstream, presumably to where he'd crossed. Darcy watched him go, realizing it was the longest conversation she'd had with anyone in weeks. Most of her neighbors lived miles away, and trips into the small settlement of Riverton happened only when necessary for supplies. The darkness was gathering quickly now, and Darcy turned toward home, aware that the stranger was right about one thing: it wasn't wise to be out alone after sunset. The next morning, Darcy was chopping wood behind her cabin when she heard the distinctive sound of approaching hoofbeats. She paused, axe held firmly in her hands, and turned to see Adam Zachary riding into her yard on a sturdy chestnut gelding. "Mrs. Dawson," he called out, stopping a respectful distance away. "Mr. Zachary," she acknowledged, lowering the axe but not setting it aside. "I thought you'd be on your way north by now." He dismounted, keeping hold of his horse's reins. "We're making camp about 2 miles upstream for a few days. Some of the cattle are looking footsore and there's good grazing there." He gestured to the pile of wood she'd been working on. "That's quite a stack for one person." "Winter comes early here," Darcy replied, "and stays long." Adam nodded, then seemed to hesitate before speaking again. I noticed your barn roof has a bad patch. Storm damage. Darcy's shoulders tensed. She didn't need reminders of all the work Thomas had left unfinished. Last spring's winds, I've been meaning to fix it. I could help, he offered simply. Have the experience and the tools, wouldn't take more than a day. Suspicion flared in Darcy's mind. Why would you do that? You don't know me. No, madam, I don't, he agreed. But I know what it's like to have too much work and too few hands. He gestured to the homestead around them, the small cabin, the barn, the fenced garden plot, all of it requiring constant attention. Besides, my men can handle the herd for a day or two without me. They're good cowboys, just resting up before the last push north. Darcy studied him, looking for any sign of ulterior motives. His face was open, weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into distant horizons. He didn't look much older than 30. I can pay you, she finally said. Adam shook his head. Not necessary. Consider it neighborly, even if I'm just passing through. Darcy hesitated, pride warring with practicality. The roof did need fixing before the snow came, and doing it alone would be dangerous work. All right, she conceded, but you'll take a meal for your trouble at least. Fair enough. Adam smiled, and Darcy was struck by how it transformed his face, softening the hard lines earned from life on the trail. I'll come by tomorrow morning if that suits you. That would be fine. After he rode away, Darcy stood motionless, axe still in her hands, wondering what had possessed her to accept help from a stranger. Since Thomas's death, she'd been fiercely independent, refusing assistance even from the few neighbors scattered within riding distance. Perhaps it was easier to accept help from someone passing through someone who wouldn't stay long enough to make her feel beholden. Adam arrived early the next day, tools strapped to his saddle. He worked efficiently, replacing rotted boards and patching the holes in the barn roof, while Darcy tended to her usual chores, feeding the chickens, working in her small vegetable garden, and mending clothes on the cabin's porch when the morning grew warmer. She found herself stealing glances at the cowboy as he worked. There was something compelling about his steady movements, the way he approached each task with quiet confidence. By midday, the roof was nearly finished, and Darcy called him down for the promised meal. Hope stew is all right, she said as she placed a steaming bowl before him at the small table inside her cabin. It's venison. Shot the deer myself last week. More than all right, Adam replied, waiting for her to sit before starting. Been living on beans and biscuits for weeks. This smells like heaven. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Adam spoke again. You've done well keeping this place up. Can't be easy on your own. Darcy looked up sharply, but there was no pity in his eyes, just matter-of-fact acknowledgement. My husband died 3 months ago, she said, the words still strange on her tongue. Fever took him quickly. Adam nodded. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Dawson. Thank you. Darcy found herself continuing, though she hadn't planned to. We came out here 2 years ago. Thomas had dreams of building something that would last, something we could pass on to children someday. She looked around the cabin, at the half-finished shelves Thomas had been working on when he fell ill. Now I'm just trying to hold on to what we started. And you're doing it, Adam said, his voice firm. That's no small thing. Darcy met his gaze, surprised by the understanding she found there. Have you lost someone, Mr. Zachary? A shadow crossed his face. My wife. 5 years ago now, we were in Kansas trying to start a small ranch. Childbirth took her and our son. He said it simply, but Darcy could hear the old pain beneath the words. Is that why you drive cattle now, to keep moving? Adam considered this as he finished his stew. Maybe at first, now I think I just haven't found a reason to stop yet. After lunch, Adam returned to finish the roof while Darcy resumed her chores. By late afternoon, the repair was complete, and the barn looked better than it had since before Thomas fell ill. Ought to hold through winter and beyond, Adam said, climbing down the ladder. I reinforced some other weak spots I noticed while I was up there. I don't know how to thank you, Darcy said, genuinely moved by his kindness. Adam glanced toward the river, visible from where they stood. Actually, there is something. Would you mind showing me that spot where you walk? By the river. Been driving cattle through some pretty barren country. Wouldn't mind sitting somewhere peaceful before heading back to camp. Darcy hesitated only briefly. Of course. They walked together down the gentle slope to the riverbank, the late afternoon sun casting golden light across the water. The Sweetwater River flowed steadily, its surface glittering like scattered diamonds. "This is where I come to think," Darcy said as they reached her usual spot. "Every evening since Thomas passed." Adam didn't respond immediately, taking in the vista of river, plains, and distant mountains. "I can see why," he finally said. "Makes a man feel both small and significant at the same time." "Exactly," Darcy agreed, surprised at his articulation of something she'd felt but never put into words. "The river keeps flowing no matter what happens in our lives, but standing here, I still matter. My grief matters." Adam nodded. "After Eliza died, I used to ride out alone at dawn. Just me and my horse watching the sun come up. Reminded me the world was still turning." They stood in companionable silence, watching the river flow. Darcy realized with a start that she felt more at peace than she had in months, standing beside this man she barely knew. "I should get back," Adam said eventually. "Still have cattle to see to, of course." Darcy turned from the river. "Thank you again for the roof." "My pleasure, Mrs. Dawson." "Darcy," she corrected him impulsively. "Please call me Darcy." A smile touched his eyes. "Darcy then, and I'm Adam." Over the next 3 days, Adam found reasons to ride to Darcy's homestead, bringing her a portion of the deer one of his men had shot, helping her repair a broken wagon wheel, offering advice on her small herd of cattle. Each visit ended with a walk to the river, where they talked with increasing ease. Darcy learned that Adam had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, had fought briefly for the Union during the final year of the war, and had been driving cattle up from Texas for the past 4 years. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her marriage to Thomas at 19, and their journey west in search of land to call their own. On the 4th day, Adam arrived looking troubled. "We'll be moving on tomorrow," he said without preamble. "The cattle are rested and we need to reach Montana before the first snows." Darcy nodded, ignoring the pang of disappointment that shot through her. "Of course, you've already delayed longer than you planned." "I wanted to make sure you'll be all right for the winter," Adam said. "You've got enough firewood, food stored up." "I'll be fine," Darcy assured him, touched by his concern. "I've salted venison, dried fruits, and enough preserves to last until spring. And there are neighbors about 5 miles west who check on me occasionally." Adam seemed reluctant to accept her assurance. "Winter's harsh in these territories. If you need anything, I won't be the first widow to survive a Wyoming winter," Darcy interrupted gently. "But thank you for your concern." They walked to the river one last time, the late afternoon sun warm on their backs. When they reached the bank, Adam turned to face her. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice unusually hesitant. "After we sell the cattle in Montana, I was planning to winter there before heading back to Texas in the spring. But," he paused, seeming to search for words. "I could come back this way, check on you, make sure you're managing all right." Darcy's heart quickened. "That's a long detour just to check on a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore, Darcy." His voice was soft but certain. "And I haven't felt this, settled, in a very long time." Darcy looked away, watching the river flow. Part of her wanted to tell him yes, to cling to this unexpected connection. Another part, the part still raw with grief and fear, urged caution. "I don't know what I feel yet," she admitted. "Everything since Thomas died has been about surviving each day I wasn't looking for." She gestured between them, unable to name what had begun to grow. Adam nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'm not asking for promises, just permission to return." Darcy looked up at him, studying his face, the earnest eyes, the slight tension in his jaw as he awaited her answer. She thought about the long winter ahead, the isolation that had seemed like a sanctuary for her grief but now felt like a prison. Yes, she said finally. You can come back. Relief washed over his features. I'll be here before the first real snow, mid-November at the latest. The next morning, Darcy stood outside her cabin and watched Adam ride away, his silhouette growing smaller against the eastern horizon. The air held the crisp promise of autumn, and for the first time since Thomas's death, she found herself looking forward to something beyond mere survival. True to his word, Adam returned just as the first frost silvered the grass in early November. He arrived with supplies: coffee, sugar, fabric for new clothes, and news from the outside world. Most importantly, he brought a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire blazing in Darcy's hearth. "I've been thinking about your cattle," he said on his second evening back as they sat at her table sharing a venison stew. "You've got good grazing land here. With the right breeding stock, you could build a respectable herd." Darcy considered this. Thomas always wanted to focus on farming. "The cattle were just for our own needs. You could do both," Adam suggested, "but cattle are less vulnerable to drought and hail than crops. It's how most folks make their living out here." "Are you suggesting I become a rancher, Mr. Zachary?" Darcy asked, a teasing note in her voice that surprised even her. Adam smiled, and Darcy noticed how it reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that made her heart beat faster. "I'm suggesting you have options. This land is yours. You can shape it however you want." Later, bundled against the November chill, they walked to the river as had become their habit. The water ran lower now, revealing more of the rocky riverbed, but its voice was still strong, still constant. "Will you go back to Texas in the spring?" Darcy asked, the question she'd been holding since his return. Adam was quiet for a long moment, watching the river flow. "I don't know," he finally answered. "I've been driving cattle for other men for years now, thinking maybe it's time I worked for myself again. Here." Darcy's voice was barely audible over the river's murmur. Adam turned to her, his expression serious. "If there's a reason to stay." Darcy met his gaze, feeling something shift inside her like ice breaking up on the river in spring. "I think," she began, then faltered. "I think I might be ready to find out if there is." Adam reached for her hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers wrapped around hers, warm and strong. "That's enough for me," he said softly. The winter of 1870-71 was harsh, with snow piling high and temperatures dropping low enough to freeze breath in the air. But inside Darcy's cabin, something new was blooming. Adam repaired her fences, built sturdy shelves to replace the ones Thomas had begun, and taught her more about caring for cattle in severe weather. In the evenings, they sat before the fire, sometimes talking until midnight, sometimes comfortable in shared silence. Adam told her stories of trail drives and frontier towns, of the characters he'd met and the places he'd seen. Darcy shared memories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, of her parents and siblings she hadn't seen since heading west. As January deepened, they began making plans. Adam would ride to Riverton in the spring to purchase breeding cattle. They would expand the garden, perhaps build a root cellar. Each plan assumed his continued presence, though neither explicitly acknowledged what was happening between them. It was on a rare mild day in February, when the sun shone bright enough to melt patches of snow, that they finally spoke of it directly. They had walked to the river, breaking through crusted snow to reach the bank where water still flowed beneath a thin sheet of ice. "I've been thinking about what you said," Darcy began, her breath fogging in the cold air. "About having options." Adam waited, giving her the space to continue at her own pace, something she'd come to appreciate deeply about him. "When Thomas died, I thought my life was set. I would keep this homestead going in his memory, and that would be enough." Darcy watched a lone eagle circle high above the river, "But now I find myself wanting more than mere survival." Adam turned to face her, his expression careful, hopeful. "What do you want, Darcy?" She met his gaze directly. "I want to build something here, something that will last, and—" She took a deep breath. "I want to build it with you." Joy spread across Adam's face, transforming it. "Are you proposing to me, Mrs. Dawson?" A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, a sound so foreign she barely recognized it as her own. "I suppose I am, in a manner of speaking." Adam took both her hands in his. "Then in a manner of speaking, I accept." His expression grew more serious. "But I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, not just step into another man's place." Darcy's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "You've never tried to take Thomas's place, you've created your own." Adam lifted one hand to her cheek, his touch gentle. "May I kiss you, Darcy Dawson?" She nodded, and he leaned forward, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that felt like a promise, like the first page of a new chapter rather than an ending to the old one. When they parted, Darcy felt breathless, her heart racing as it hadn't in longer than she could remember. "I love you," Adam said simply. "Have since I watched you standing by this river last fall, looking like you belonged to it somehow." Tears welled in Darcy's eyes. "I think I started loving you when you fixed my barn roof and didn't expect anything in return." They stood by the frozen river, holding each other as the winter sun began its early descent toward the horizon. Darcy rested her head against Adam's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath layers of wool and cotton. "We should head back before dark," Adam murmured against her hair. "Storm's coming in," Darcy nodded, but neither moved immediately, reluctant to break this moment of perfect understanding. Finally, with the sky darkening, they turned away from the river and walked back toward the cabin, hand in hand. Spring arrived slowly in 1871, the snow melting in fits and starts, revealing muddy ground that gradually greened with new growth. Adam and Darcy worked side by side, repairing winter damage to the buildings, preparing fields for planting, and caring for the small herd of cattle that had survived the harsh months. In April, with the roads finally passable, they rode together to Riverton. The small frontier town had grown over the winter, with new buildings under construction and more settlers arriving weekly. Darcy felt strange walking down the dusty main street, aware of curious glances from townspeople who knew her as the widow Dawson. At the general store, Mrs. Peterson, the proprietor's wife, pulled Darcy aside while Adam examined tools at the back counter. "Is that your bow, Darcy?" the older woman asked without preamble. "Heard you had a man staying at your place all winter." Darcy felt a flush rise to her cheeks but held Mrs. Peterson's gaze steadily. "Yes, that's Adam Zachary. He's been helping me with the homestead." Mrs. Peterson's eyes were shrewd but not unkind. "Thomas was a good man, would have wanted you to find happiness again." Darcy swallowed hard. "I believe he would." Later, after purchasing supplies and arranging for breeding cattle to be delivered in May, they rode to the small church at the edge of town. Pastor Miller welcomed them warmly, listening as Adam explained their situation. "So you wish to be married," the pastor said, looking between them. "Yes," Adam replied firmly, "as soon as is proper." Pastor Miller's gaze fell on Darcy. "And you, Mrs. Dawson, this is your wish as well?" Darcy nodded, her voice clear. "It is. I know it's been less than a year since my husband's passing, but life moves at its own pace out here," Pastor Miller finished for her. "I've seen widows and widowers remarry within months of losing a spouse. Survival often depends on it." His expression softened. "But I sense this is more than mere practicality." "Much more," Adam confirmed, reaching for Darcy's hand. The pastor nodded. "Then I would be honored to perform the ceremony. When did you have in mind?" They settled on the first Sunday in June, giving time for word to spread to neighboring homesteads and for the land to fully awaken from winter's grip. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of activity. Adam built an addition to the cabin, a second bedroom for the future they both hoped would include children. Darcy sewed a new dress from fabric Adam had brought her in November, a soft blue calico that brought out her eyes. On the morning of their wedding day, Darcy stood by the river alone, watching the water flow strong with spring runoff. She thought of Thomas, allowing herself to remember the good years they'd had and to say a silent goodbye to the life they'd planned together. "I hope you understand," she whispered to the rushing water. "I never expected to love again, but I do, so much." A sense of peace settled over her, as if the river itself had granted permission to move forward. Darcy turned away from the water and walked back toward the homestead, where neighbors had begun to gather for the ceremony. Pastor Miller performed the simple service on the porch of the cabin, with 20 or so neighbors and a few of Adam's cowboy friends in attendance. Darcy wore her blue dress and flowers in her hair. Adam had purchased a new shirt and vest for the occasion, his normally wind-tousled hair neatly combed. "Do you, Adam Zachary, take Darcy Dawson to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Pastor Miller asked, his voice carrying across the yard. Adam's eyes never left Darcy's as he answered, "I do, with all my heart." When it was Darcy's turn, her voice was clear and sure, "I do." "Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Miller declared. "You may kiss your bride." Adam's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, and the small crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration continued well into the evening, with food and music and dancing under the stars. As the last guests departed, Adam and Darcy stood on their porch, his arm around her waist as they watched the moon rise over the eastern plains. "Happy, Mrs. Zachary?" Adam asked softly. Darcy smiled at the new name, leaning into his embrace. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again." "I've been thinking about our cattle operation," Adam said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "With the breeding stock coming next week, we'll be on our way to building something substantial. Our very own ranch," Darcy agreed. "What should we call it?" Adam was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Riverbank Ranch, in honor of where we first really talked, where I fell in love with you." Darcy turned in his arms to face him. "Perfect. The river brought us together. It seems right to honor that." That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other in new ways, their love deepening in the intimate darkness of their cabin. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, they spoke softly of their hopes for the future children playing along the riverbank, cattle grazing on the rolling plains, seasons turning one into another as they built their life together. "I never expected this," Darcy whispered. "When you found me standing alone by that river last fall." Adam's fingers traced gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Maybe some things are meant to be. I crossed that river looking for smoke, but I found so much more." "And you never left," Darcy finished for him, smiling in the darkness. "No," Adam agreed, pulling her closer. "And I never will." 5 years later, Darcy stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Adam taught their 4-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Eliza, named for Adam's first wife, played contentedly at Darcy's feet, while the baby inside her kicked vigorously, as if eager to join the family outside. Riverbank Ranch had prospered beyond their early dreams. Their herd now numbered over 300 head, and their reputation for quality cattle had spread throughout the territory. The addition of a bunkhouse had allowed them to hire 3 permanent hands, with more coming on during busy seasons. Each evening, when chores were done and the children were settled, Adam and Darcy still walked to the river together. Sometimes they spoke of the day's events or plans for the ranch's future. Other times they simply stood in companionable silence, watching the endless flow of water that had witnessed their beginning. The river had seen Darcy at her lowest, a widow walking alone with her grief. It had seen Adam cross over, looking for nothing more than the source of distant smoke. And it had seen what neither of them could have imagined that autumn day in 1870, the building of a life, a family, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Every time they returned from the river hand in hand, Darcy felt the same certainty in her heart. Adam had indeed crossed over that day at the river, and true to his word, he had never left. And she, who had once walked alone in sorrow, now walked beside him in joy.